Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to Think Out Loud with Me, a chatcast produced, hosted, and humbly offered by yours truly, Natalie Peterson, from my little neck of the woods in northern Colorado to you in yours, wherever and whenever that might be. This digital adventure is an effort to turn years of internal chattering, wondering, silent suffering, and physical and mental close calls into enlightening and empowering conversations with others. Given how many choices you have to spend your time, I consider it an honor that you're listening in. I've mentioned in past casts that I grew up on a river, the Los Pinos, or Pine River, actually. The water runs cold and fast down from high altitudes of the San Juan Mountains through Vicedo Reservoir and in through my tiny little hometown of Bayfield in Southwest Colorado. As a young girl, my bedroom window was at the very back of the 70-foot trailer that sat in space number 7 of Bayfield Mobile Home Park. Just 30 or so feet beyond, the river was literally my backyard. I cannot begin to estimate how much time I spent in that water, floating on that water, sitting by that water, jumping, splashing, soaking, being, loving that cold, clean, pure river water. In the spring months, it would run deep and dangerous, dark brown with runoff and incredible energy. In the winter months, it would contract and freeze and go really, really quiet. No matter the season, the sound of its current lulled me to sleep. And the wind that skimmed the waves carried my dreams. River rocks and aspen, lilacs, pussy willow, sweet peas and ducks and osprey and bald eagles, they all witnessed my life. Several weekends ago, I drove the 450 miles down to Bayfield to sit on the rocks by my river. I peeled off my socks, rolled up my pants, and literally gasped in shock at the freezing temperature as my feet submerged in the snow melt. I closed my eyes and I tilted my head back to the warm Colorado sun, and I breathed in that special thin air that circles around the little inlet behind what was once my home. Oh, river, I hear you, feel you, calling me. Oh, river, who will I be when I reach the sea? Sadly, my father took his own life sitting pretty close to where I sat by the pine a few weekends ago. And in quiet moments like the ones I experienced when I find my way there, I connect with him in a way that frees me of sadness and lifts me with love. The grief I know when I sit there in peace is healing. My cells stir. My ears activate to sounds of a past life. My hands tingle. And my heart literally enlarges in my chest and I connect. I find my way back home. Today, I have found my way here to connect by the water and share space with a beautiful human, Lisa Cheny-Philp. Lisa is vision keeper of Women of the Water. She serves as a death doula, grief guide, shamanic practitioner, creative facilitator, artist, and river guide. Lisa belongs to the world as one who rewrites history, one who dwells in river canyons, and one who dreams of the river meeting the sea. As the founder of Women of the Water, she braids together her skills, training, and lived experiences to help us remember the ways and wisdom of water so we can well tend experiences of death, dying, grief, loss, and love, and restore life for generations past, present, and future. Lisa has been embedded in Colorado communities and watersheds for 20 years and currently calls Fort Collins, Colorado, and the Poudre River watershed home with her husband and daughter. Today, she is here with me, and I am so honored. I have been looking forward to this time with you, Lisa. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Natalie. You took us on, such a rich journey just now. And as soon as you named the Los Pinos River and described it through all its seasons, my whole body, it was turned cold. It was as if that right now, snow melt to runoff was running through my body, as you were sharing. And then when you weaved in those lyrics from Mamuse's song, "O River," uh, it just intensified. It was like ice running through my veins, just so much resonance and stories overlapping, and oh yes, and that, oh yes, and that. And this was like a layering.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you for giving me such a rich welcome, such a rich introduction.
Well, I knew you would recognize those lyrics of the song. Uh, I penned my monologue this morning, and then was going back over some things and saw the lyrics in your signature, and thought that needs to be in there. And the universe wants us together. It was one of those things where I was like, yeah, this is all meant to be.
Mhm.
And so I'm just extremely happy to have you here, and safe place to share my story. And I'm very curious about yours. What's your river story?
What's my river story? Well, I'm remembering you saying this is my river, and I had the thought as you were sharing that it's like, oh, what's my river? And I know there's more than one, but the river that came to mind, and when you say tell me your story of the river, it's the Colorado River.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there are ways that I interacted with rivers in my childhood, but the one I really bonded with, if you will, is the Upper Colorado River, in between Vail and Steamboat.
Mm.
Um, and I spent 3 summers in college working as a river guide, living in a tent on the side of a mountain, saving quarters for coin-op showers. It was a scrappy, felt like summer camp for adults kind of lifestyle that I just kind of stumbled into, really. Um, and that being now 20 some odd years ago, was a very different human. Um, and I was in a stage of life where I was kind of partying, as a college student, but I recognize now much later in life that a lot of those activities for me were also masking a lot of unprocessed grief. Um, and that grief comes from the death of my mother from breast cancer when she was 45 years old and I was 15 years old at the time. 13 when she was diagnosed, 15 when she died. Um, so I didn't know what the relationship with the river was that I was establishing then. It wasn't overt to me. It was just like, this is my summer job. I work outside. I live in my tent on the side of the mountain, and life was going on. Um, and I spent time on that river for years after that. I still return now. But it was probably about 10 years after those 3 summers that I spent there that I returned to to go to a wedding of a couple of friends of mine that I worked on the river with, although in the early days. And I knew I was I was longing for something. Um, like I missed something that was right in front of me, and I was like, is it these people? Is it this land? Like, what is it? I can't put my finger on it. And at some point it dawned on me, and it's like, oh, it's the river, it's the water. Uh, and there's some way that I could start to understand or feel in a different way that like this river had been there trying to offer me healing and doing it in all the ways that it could do. And all the rivers that I spent time on in the years between, which is quite a lot. Um, and I could tell there was a connection there that was critical to me. As part of a grief ally, and also just really part of what I've come to recognize as an earth medicine that my natural constitution is low on.
Mhm.
So I don't know that I carry um, like I'm a more fiery, airy sort of individual, and I feel like a lot of the ways that I grew up and the cultural norms that were offered to me were not valuing or placing water at the center. So I felt it really absent in my life, and then to recognize it outside of me. And also in the contrast of living in a very high, dry place where water is scarce and it's not to be taken for granted and it's not copious.
Mm-hmm.
It's, it's truly a gift. Um, so I feel like it's been teaching me. It's been showing me how to walk with it, how to learn from it, how to embody it, what its gifts are, what its wisdom is. Um, and and yeah, it just feels like an infinite wellspring of nourishment.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's for me, like it's particular how it can nourish me, and as I watch it unfold in other people and start to talk about it with people, I get to see the different expressions and the validation, um, that many of the ways that it nourishes me are universal,
Mm-hmm.
or extend to large swaths of us. I'm not, special in that way.
Yeah. And you have, with Women of the Water, found a way to live that passion, that connection with the water, to connect with others. And what I have experienced of you, it's a very sincere connection, because water is a shared resource amongst us, that we can instantly relate, and it can be this theme, if you will, that carries through as teaching, as reference point, as gift, as platform, underneath us, foundation, if you will. I'm curious about the metaphorical application that you've taken the river, Women of the Water, to apply to, just across your gifts, and how you bring, and share space with others. Can you give us a
Mm-hmm.
little taste
Yeah, I
of
mean, the
that?
thing I didn't name about the Colorado River as I was sharing, which is one of the key components for me, and it is I don't even know if it's a metaphor, it's just a geographic truth that mirrors the truth that I feel about our human experience, which is
Mm-hmm.
the reality that the Colorado River does not run all the way to the sea anymore, or right now
Mm,
in history, very rarely. It dries up before that water, goes through the whole water cycle of clouds and rain and condensation and collecting on the mountaintops and moving all the way, following the path of least resistance. And before it gets to return to whence it came and reconvene with the sea, uh, it's used up. It's used up. It's over allocated is what's
mm-hmm.
happening.
Mm-hmm.
And there's many different reasons for that. And it's a very complex situation. It's not an easy point the finger and blame this entity or that entity. But that's what's happened. It's been over allocated to the Western states and it doesn't meet the sea. And that phenomenon of the life cycle not completing in the way that is natural for it, um, is the mirror that helps me see what's happening in our human culture around how we treat the ends of life cycles, why death and dying in its different forms that we're initiated by it can be so brutally painful in ways that aren't necessary, but are part and parcel of the how we do endings, not the fact that there are endings.
Mm,
It's as if that last, 30 miles or that last bit of the cycle is just it's incomplete. It's not well tended. And so there's some part of us, or at least this is how I've experienced it.
mm-hmm.
The death of my mother specifically. There's a way that I can say it's not the fact that she died that has been so hard to live with all these years. It's a lot of the circumstances of the how she died and the ways that we didn't turn towards the fact that she was going to die. So many little nuances here. But that's the biggest metaphor or comparison that I can make, is that there's this water life cycle that's incomplete and relevant to an entire region of the country in which we live. And there's a way that the life cycles in our culture are where the endings are skipped over or considered less than or ignored or swept under the rug or put in the closet or locked up in a box, or all the things that we do. And there's consequence. I think that's what feels true. There's consequence to those cycles not completing. It does matter, even if we can't quite put our finger on it exactly and say this is why it matters. It's just the fact that the life cycle is not completing is enough to raise alarm in my nervous system.
Wow, what a powerful parallel I am just experiencing between how you've shared the Colorado River not meeting, those last 30 miles, right? And then the endings not being tended to, just like there are consequences. And eventually, I think from my own experience, the death and grief suppressed, tucked away, you've taken your 3 days bereavement, now get back at it, right? That there are consequences of holding those very real and powerful emotions at bay, and being able to come. So 2 ways: being able to come back into and experience grief, even years, in my own case, it's been 25, like so many years since I lost my father, being able to come back in and experience grief from a healing place. But also I'm interested in, we are so scared of death, or we've been programmed to put aside the reality of it until we have to deal with it. And even then, knowing that it's coming, we still don't we don't honor, we don't prepare, and I'm using very general terms to make my point. Some folks do a beautiful job of it. I'm just want to think out loud with you around why, as a society, we are so scared of death.
Why, as a society, are we so scared of death? Well, that's a good question. I mean, what comes to me is the reality, as I see it, is that so much of our culture, our Western culture, our patriarchal culture, our grind culture, all these norms or regular ways that we can orient to, at least from my perspective, doesn't set us up to be humans. We're set up to be mythical creatures, gods, ones that don't need rest, ones that don't grieve, ones that are happy to, strap a boulder to our back and hike uphill until the end of time. Or at least those are the unspoken agreements I think we make more often than we realize.
Yeah.
And to admit weakness or incapability or the unsustainability of what we've said yes to, I mean, I think it brings up some dissonance for us. And I think most simply, there's the other way you could go about this of the unknown. Death is an unknown. What happens when we die? Where do we go? certainly, I'm guessing that's a big source of the fear. But I would say there's a third piece here, um, that I could say for myself is one of the fears I orient to try to embrace impermanence. It's like the place of practice for me is orienting towards the fear of regret. Something like, what do I fear? How do I fear my death will impact the ones I love that are still living? Um, and I think when I can get curious about my fear from that perspective, there's something then that can happen that then points you towards inspired action, that points you towards purpose, that points you towards a way of living that reminds you that death is the gift of life, that we are not doomed for all time, for eternity, to be in this form and to never know, quote unquote, like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some things that are coming forth when you ask that. What comes up for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's curious to me. Because there's the logical part of my brain that is very matter of factly, we're all going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay with me. And I'm not sure why there's not more to that than just that's okay. I'm not, maybe it's my own experience with death early with my father, losing him young, and being with several loved ones as they have transitioned, that I've created it's not to say I'm not sad and that I'm not affected by death as I've witnessed it, but it is. It is coming. In a recent trip down to the pyramids of Teo, we did a ceremony around death, actually attending our own funeral. And I have to say that listening to the obituary that I wrote, writing the obituary, I should back up, writing the obituary for the afternoon, it was the afternoon assignment, was a roller coaster of emotions. But then, and felt there was a finality to the words of it, even though it was I'm very alive and I know I'm going to be on the other side of it being read. It felt very final. And I chose a song that was tough as hell. Everything from Madonna to, Pink Floyd. And I chose Alabama Shakes. And now I can't remember the name of the song. But I just love Brittany Howard, and just there's a grief in her voice that I hear that penetrates me. But then the experience was underneath a sheet, and while the song was being played, having others in attendance place flowers and speak in my ear, and having the earth laid on top of my chest. And it was pretty profound, I have to say. And I'm still very much in the mindset of it. I will transition at some point. I'm less scared of it now after that experience. It was very sad to me to hear others affected, soul sisters, mostly females in attendance, and hearing grief in their voice was very powerful. So I would say, I think it's not spending enough time with it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, is part of why we're scared of it. And then too, like you're saying, it's I don't have time for it, because where am I going to, in the grind and the hustle and but it happens in such a fleeting moment. Just recently losing my mom within a few days of finding out, and then she was gone. She didn't plan on going for many years. I would imagine we don't plan on going, but I think we can.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not specifically, but I think we can create conversation around it and create, and to use your words, well-tended endings.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and life cycles, the reality of life cycles, just really honoring and being present for when it does happen, to really make as much space for it as we can so that we can experience it in its beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and your role then, as I think a lot of folks have no understanding or concept, or maybe they assume they understand the role of a death doula.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to just hear your, you know, share about your role as in that very critical place, helping folks have well-tended endings.
Sure. I mean, the role of a death doula, it feels like a field like social work, or part of my background is as a city planner, where it's the skill set that has a lot of potential applications. I think the most discreet or at the heart of what a death doula, where that comes from, is about attendance, right? This is like holistic attendance for an individual through the active dying and death process. It can be as narrow as, a few days, weeks, maybe months before death, and covering again days, maybe weeks, maybe months after the death. And it's primarily for the person dying, but can also be for the family and caregivers and loved ones that are close to that person. And this field, it's both ancient and new. We're seeing more and more birth doulas, and people, as far as I can tell, have a little bit more orientation to what that service is. It's not the same as a nurse. It's not the same as a midwife. It's almost like one layer out from the medical system, which makes it challenging financially in some cases, because there's not a lot of support beyond self-pay. And it gives a little bit more flexibility in the types of services that can be provided, because it's not scripted or predetermined by, codes that can be reimbursed, that sort of thing. So you really do get an individual self-selected attendance across a significant threshold, that kind of guarantees and says up front that we're going to care for you physically, we're going to care for you mentally, we're going to care for you emotionally, we're going to care for you spiritually, and we're going to care for you practically. And that's pretty rare. That's a pretty robust blanket that you get to wrap around somebody, rather than ones with like some holes over here, some loose ends over here, and saying like, good luck. I hope that that helps you through the process. So that's, in a nutshell, what the field is. And I would say the application that I've come to use with it most often right now is a little bit less than guiding people through that actual death threshold. I do that a little bit, but what I do more of is like your experience, is helping people think about their end of life before it's upon them. And certainly we never know if it's actually upon us or not. At any given moment, we might have 3 months to live and we have no idea. But I practice putting people in the container often of what if you were told today that you have 3 months left to live? What are
Mm-hmm.
your priorities? What's important to you? Uh, what what now in this new reality is necessary? Um, and helping people move through some of those practices, like you did, writing your obituary. What is it to be shrouded in some way,
Mm-hmm.
and that space of oh, this is what it would be like for my body when I'm no longer living. Something like this would happen. What does that feel like? What does it bring up in me? So I'm very interested in helping people have conversations about death long before it is imminent or known to be imminent, and to help people try it on. What, like, how can you embody um, and turn towards and like make death, who might be your sworn enemy, something more like your teacher or a mentor, or for me, it's more like a friend or a companion.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I call him my partner in crime or my co-conspirator, the one I make mischief with
Yeah.
and who like helps me get into a little bit of trouble and
Yeah.
um yeah, just be up to something that's a little bit out of what society is saying is, what we should be doing.
Well,
It's
and therein
part of
lies part,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, therein lies part of the challenge, right? Is that there's this script that you say, you use the term script, and it struck me that we've created a script that does not do much to deal with, to pre-plan or or just come into relationship with death. The script says wait till it happens, and then here's what you do: you take time off, you check these boxes, and then you come back, and then you go through any number of, here's your stages, and one of them is anger, and one of them, and there's this these kind of rules of grief, right? And I'm interested in, so let me back into this a different way. You have launched um, a really cool part of your newsletter is kind of a Dear Abby type format, and I want to. I'll make sure everybody knows how to be included in that in show notes. But in your most recent newsletter, you responded to a woman. I want to say her name was Sandra, with thoughts around the paradox of grief and joy.
Mhm.
And that, in that script, if I just back to what I was saying, that joy, we're not sure where to put joy in that script, right? We're supposed to celebrate a loved one, and we're supposed to remember the good things, right? But it feels like that joy is kind of has a weird place in what society has told us is grief. And so I took some quick notes I wanted to just share. You write in your response to her, I think is really profound. I have long visualized grief and joy as the far ends of a pendulum swing, where our capacity for one is equal and opposite to the other. And so that when you say that in that reaction and action and reaction, right, that having one increases your at a certain depth, increases your capacity on the other for the same feeling. If I'm not doing it as eloquently as you have done,
Mhm. Mhm.
but that you're expanding your capacity for both by feeling one or the other. And um, I wanted to think about joy as you thought about it with Sandra in this letter, and where joy fits into the grieving process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will say that and I'll speak from my personal experience a little bit on this one, because I think once I feel like I was initiated by death, it was like my mother's death initiated me in a very particular way. And at the time, there was no one around me that shared that story. So I felt pretty alone in it, or different in that story. Um, and the ways that I carried the grief over years and years. I mean, it's been like 26 years now. So I've got a long, a long orientation. I think what I did was I contracted my experience. Like you're talking about, when we expand our capacity for grief, we expand our capacity for joy. And I think when very naturally, I mean, we go through expansion and contraction, but I think for me, I shrunk my window of tolerance down to something pretty narrow, um, where I was kind of blocking or like armoring up to protect myself from similar losses of a scale that I had already known viscerally were possible, and had happened to me. So I'm, trying to block that side from it happening again. And what happened as a consequence, which was not my choosing, was that I contracted the other side too. And so now I don't feel a lot of happiness, contentment, joy. Like I could see it on other people, I could recognize it, but I didn't have a natural way to get in that space and embody it.
Mm,
Um, and so, and for me, it was probably around age 30, right? My mother died at 45 and I was 15. And when I hit about 30, that's when I started to get more curious about grief. And I tipped the scale towards being closer to the age my mother was when she died than the age that I was when she died. And so I could look at it differently and wonder more about her experience, and found these different ways to start nibbling at the edges of all of that, buildup of grief. Uh, and my orientation has always been towards the grief. Like, it's hard for me to say, like, I'm just gonna like pursue joy. It's always
mm-hmm,
felt like kind of a bypassing thing to me, or like Pollyanna, like just something that's against my nature. So for me, it's always like I turn and look towards the grief, and it's like, okay, confronting the grief. And I feel like as we're opening ourselves up to greater sensation, it doesn't matter in what direction we get the other side, the other end of the spectrum, um, just because we're pushing on one boundary, and that push, like the expansion then happens all around us.
mm-hmm,
And so it's almost like the joy is the carrot, right? It's like, if I can turn towards this grief and work with it more and get more comfortable with it, and
mm,
move it and get unstuck and make it a more elastic boundary, then the benefit, the consequence that I'm not actively pushing on is coming through anyway. And now I'm more flexible in the direction of joy as well. I can reach out for that. But I'm not just reaching out for something I know nothing about, which is how I feel
mm-hmm,
about joy often, and where I'm like, oh, I've got this long history with grief. Like we're close. I can lean in this way and
mm-hmm,
circle around and get the benefit over there.
mm,
So I've really felt that to be true in my own experience, and yes, to be able to be in conversation with Sandra about it, and then to have all these other reference points to pull in, it was like, yeah, I don't think we're just making this up. I think we're onto something.
yeah,
And many of
yeah,
us are onto something.
absolutely. It reminds me, as you were speaking, the kind of tenets of yoga, and the concept that in like a yin yoga, where you are really focused on stretching and leaning into muscle sets, and you within a minute, if it's 3 and 5 minute stretches, that at about the 3 minute mark, you have made it past that initial burn, if you will. You're not hurting yourself by any means, but you've settled into a stretch that you can then lean in a little deeper, and touch a little further. And those last couple minutes can be just a little deeper. You're not trying to hurt yourself. You are leaning into it to where you're comfortable. And then what came to mind with what you were saying is that as you're leaning this way, you're opening up space that way, and creating an extended boundary around yourself where you have now ventured without hurting yourself. I think there's a misperception that you need to deal with your grief. You need to hammer it out and get over it, this, that, and the other, but that there are leanings in that can happen to have conversations with folks past, to have ceremony, and to experience emotions around that without having to just dive in and I need 3 weeks off to go deal with this, right? That there's space to create with all of this joy and grief, so that it's a process. It doesn't have a start and a stop.
There's some parts of a long grief story that you can't do at the beginning. You just can't do it. Like, I can't grieve mothering without a mother until I have a child,
Exactly. Yes.
Like, there are just the grief changes over time. The questions change over time. The wonderings change over time. The intensity changes over time. And we can't do that all in the 3 days after, or even in the first year after, all the ways that we put these arbitrary kind of endpoints on when we should be wrapping up our grief experience. Yeah.
At the heart of your practice are gatherings that allow people to do what we're talking about, see and feel their way. Access points is a term that you use, that there are access points and life portals through which people explore the emotion of grief, whether it's fresh or new, a new ending, a new life cycle that's come to a close, or one of years and years ago, or even ancestral, generations past. It's got to be an incredibly intense space to inhabit in your human form. And I'm just enamored with the magic that you bring as a guide. I want to make sure that folks that are listening find you, if they're so called to, and healing even in their own community, if they're elsewhere, but specifically to this, finding you as a guide and as a resource. Women of the Water you've got groups coming up, you've got certain experiences that you host. Can you talk a little bit about, just high level, about your offerings?
Yeah. I mean, well, you mentioned first the email newsletter. I've started that as a space to be in conversation through writing with people around questions on death, dying, grief, and loss, and less so me giving expert advice. It's more like what we're doing here. Let's talk out loud about this together. Let's be in conversation. So that's something that anyone can access anywhere. But a lot of my offerings are local to here in Fort Collins in the northern Colorado region. I hold monthly, I call them community grief circles for women. There's spaces where all kinds of losses, like we've been talking a lot about the death of people, but I think of any sort of ending, end of a job, end of a relationship, end of a piece of one's identity, all of these kinds of losses. I bring under one roof, actually the roof of my home and office, and we're in conversation and deep listening and creative practice and ceremony in those spaces together. turning towards grief as something we can practice, that we can make space for once a month and work with and move and be surprised by the beauty and lightness and joy that we can access when we choose to do that with intention and do it in community.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really beautiful offering. And then I also extend working with people in a one-on-one capacity to continue to use creative practices to move their grief in a way that's facilitated and guided. And I also use a shamanic journey practice to support people, specifically when they're in a place where the grief is, too heavy to be the real active participant, where it's like, I just need to open up and receive some guidance, receive some love. Like, it's hard and heavy right now. Can you help? I found that for myself and for other people to be a really beautiful way to lighten the load and give some, often seems like less practical guidance, which I think we get bogged down in the physical and the practical and underutilize our emotional, mental, and spiritual capacities when working through some of this stuff.
I heard once a river metaphor that really resonated with me, that I think you've probably heard it, but just for the sake of connection and what you were just saying, the load, the load of grief as it manifested in my life was, when I lost my father, was a mixture of anger, feeling abandoned, questioning the concept of loyalty, being completely turned off, like a flip of a switch, spirituality, just confusion around the concept of spirituality, just very mixed signals of that suicide brings for any, of the folks left behind, just confusion. The metaphor that resonated with me was coming to the river's edge with this massive load of in a pack on my back that I have been carrying for so many years, and taking up a finite amount, still a finite amount of space with. Like, this is my space. These are my emotions. This is my grief, and I'm going to hang on to it in this pack on my back. And stepping into the water, facing upstream, and attempting to go through the life of this and be in the stream, but facing up current, right? And trying to keep my footing and continuing to hold on to this pack, and at times fully questioning, just toppling under it, right? But then the absolutely beautiful relief, so simple relief and release of turning to face downstream and letting my knees fold and laying down in the water and letting the water take all my weight and just go with the flow, like releasing the weight of all of it and letting the river carry me, and still carrying my pack. Like, I can stand up and I can deal with it, but the weight of it is there's a breath that I could take, and I could come into relationship with everything I had been carrying. I think that what you do in the world in creating that realization for people, and helping people, guiding them to the water's edge, and the use of the river and all that you are called to be, is just absolutely phenomenal. And I need you to hear me saying that I think you're a beautiful human being for what you bring to the experience, and being a guide for death. I think it's a beautiful assignment from the heavens that you've taken on. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap for this cast? Any last minute bubblings up that have happened over the last several minutes?
Yeah, what I'm compelled to share is it's a practice that I use in the grief circles, but it's also become, I often feel like I'm giving people this assignment as kind of a first step in orienting to what it is to work with grief. And it relates to this metaphor, this visual with the rocks and the pack. So in my circles, the center of our circle, our sort of altar, if you will, has a glass bowl, and around the bowl are stones in a circle. And how we use them over the practice is when we speak of our grief, we choose a stone that has, some connection to our grief that we're carrying, whether we know what it is or not. We're just attracted that rock there. We hold it in our hand, we speak the grief, we speak the love, because grief and love are the same. And then we put the stone in the bowl, and then we pour water over the stone. And what this means to me, and it might mean different things to different people, is it's about the stones are building the riverbed, right? So under any channel of water, there's the earth or the foundation that holds it, that is the container for the water to flow. And so acknowledging our grief by speaking it aloud, by holding a stone, by making it visible in our hand, and then putting it down in a specific place and saying, this is my loss, is the act of allowing then the grief or the water, because grief moves like water in so many ways, to flow. So acknowledging our losses and taking them out of our pack one by one and naming them, naming what we've lost. And then I invite people to name 3 things that they love about what they've lost. So it might be, I lost my mother died. I love the German chocolate cakes she made for her birthday. I love snuggling in the crook of her knee on the couch under the crocheted blanket that she made. I love remembering that she loved to watch Wheel of Fortune every night at exactly the same time every day. Just that little act, 1 stone, 1 loss, 3 loves for the thing that's lost, place in a vessel, pour water on top. That is a grief practice. That is a way to empty that backpack, 1 stone, 2 minutes at a time. It matters. It makes a difference. It turns you around and releases that pack and lets you float with the current. Yeah.
Wow.
So I offer that just as, if you don't know where to begin, that's a possibility. Name a loss, name 3 loves, put a stone in a body of water. It can be that simple.
It can be that simple. Thank you. And thank you, folks, for listening in. Thank you for, out of all the things you could do with your day, choosing to think out loud with me and my guest, Lisa, today, Women of the Water. Until we visit again, go live beautiful lives and do it with intention. And please, 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 please don't let anyone fuck with your flow. Big hugs, big love. Bye, friend.